Taking a Knee. 3 September 2016, 4:15 p.m. 42 degrees, 26 minutes, 41.6 seconds north. 87 degrees, 49 minutes, 32.5 seconds west. On the third day of Henry's penitential display, his escort was even smaller. Just the younger Gozilo on the motor scooter and myself. I was alone in the minivan, following behind the two motos. I had absolutely no desire to see the castle again, and besides, I would have been unreachable over there in the ruins. So when we got to the B&B, I drove inside the gates and parked the minivan in a gravel area off to the side of the lodge, and stayed there, in the driver's seat, sitting and waiting. Gozilo took his post at the gate and lit a cigarette. Henry found a spot facing the front door of the old lodge and knelt down on one knee. I thought I saw the curtains moving in the house, but I couldn't be sure. Every half hour or so, Henry stood up for a moment, made the sign of the cross, and then knelt down on the other knee. For a while, I tried listening to the radio. I found a station from Bologna. At least they said Radio Bologna a lot. But the signal kept drifting in and out, and then I started to worry about wearing down the battery of the minivan. So I turned off the radio and lowered my seat to a position just between semi-recumbent and semi-supine. No, Opal Zaphiras don't give verbose names to the reclining positions. I did. I had way too much time to kill. 3 hours went by, then 4. I began to think that we might be in this for the long haul. Gozilo looked like he was handling the boredom a lot better than I was. He just stood there near the front gate, alert yet relaxed, occasionally smoking. He looked like a guy with military training. Now, by this point, I was pretty certain that the younger Gozilo, despite his refusal to use the name Godfrey, was the historical character we know as Godfrey of Bouillon, who in 1095 would become one of the top leaders of the First Crusade, the conqueror of Jerusalem. I'm not sure where it was that I came to this conclusion. Maybe it was in Gex or Turin, but what with all the driving during the day and all the drinking at night, I hadn't really had enough mental bandwidth to consider the full implications of that identification. Well, there in the courtyard of the old hunting lodge, in that semi-something position, I had plenty of time to think it all through. To wit, if that was Godfrey of Bouillon over there guarding the gate, that meant that the older Gozilo, his supposed uncle, was probably in fact his real uncle, Godfrey the Hunchback, Matilda's estranged husband. But that didn't make sense. Godfrey the Hunchback had been murdered a full year before Henry went to Canossa, so there's no way he should be tagging along on this journey. Then I recalled that I had read somewhere, in one of the bad histories or fantastic stories based on this event, there was a subplot where Henry and Godfrey the Hunchback contrived to fake Godfrey's death so that Godfrey could secretly accompany Henry on his journey to Canossa and help him murder Gregory. Then I realized where I had read that. It was from The Song of Henry. Sure. The book where Godfrey the Hunchback, pretending to be a crippled old servant, sneaks Henry's knife into the chapel at Canossa, which sets the stage for the crazy violent ending of that fake medieval poetry quasi-Nazi self-help book. I cannot even begin to describe the ending of that book. Just that everyone else dies except for Henry and Matilda, and they end up... No, I'm not going to try. It's a total piece of macho fascist propaganda. And if you're into that kind of thing, you can read it yourself. Now, it never occurred to me for a moment to think that something like that could be what was about to happen. But I did think, as I looked at Henry kneeling there, doing his best to look penitent, maybe the Song of Henry isn't total bullshit. Maybe it tells us what Henry would like to happen, his dream of how the story should end. And I found myself thinking, I hadn't seen the older Gozilo for a couple of days. Could he be sneaking around somewhere with a long knife in his hand? Should I check the back of the minivan? Come on, I thought. Godfrey the Hunchback is not curled up in the luggage space behind the way-back seat clutching a knife. No way. That idea is ridiculous. Not worth thinking about. No, I'm not going to look. I won't even turn around. I checked the time on my phone. Henry had been kneeling there for 5 hours and 20 minutes. The battery on my phone was getting low. If this went on much longer, I'd need to start the minivan's engine just to make sure all the batteries had good charges. It would be a terrible waste of benzine, but the minivan's tank was almost full, and what else could I do? You've got to keep your phone charged. But just then, the front door opened, and an older man in a bulky sweater came out. From the way he greeted Henry, helping him stand up and then giving a big hug, I figured it had to be Hugo, Henry's uncle, the abbot of Cluny. No way could a guy that warm be Gregory, I thought, as I raised my seat to the full upright position. Hugo and Henry talked for a while, then Hugo went back inside, leaving the front door open behind him. Henry, walking a little bit stiffly, went over to the younger Gozilo and asked him something. The younger Gozilo shook his head. He always seemed to have his own agenda. It looked like whatever Henry was asking now was too much. Then I saw that Gozilo was nodding in my direction. Henry came walking toward me. I rolled down the window of the minivan, and he leaned in. I was glad I had already raised the seat. "Come inside with me," he said. "I need a witness from my team." It took me a moment to process what Henry had just said. "Am I on your team?" I said. Henry just looked at me. I figured that was a yes. Got out of the minivan and followed him inside.